So I'm Erin Francis Cummings, President and CEO of Destination Analysts. It's my pleasure to be here with you, albeit virtually, to present important information about the state of traveling consumer sentiment in the United States, a look back on tourism performance in Pinellas County in 2020, and what we can expect for the months ahead. Our team of researchers at Destination Analysts serves the global travel and hospitality industry with insights into audiences, brand, and marketing performance. And we've had the great pleasure of working with Visit St. Pete-Clearwater since 2009. Let me get this slide moving for you. Okay, on the agenda today, I'll be taking you through the latest findings on the current state of American travel sentiment from our ongoing Coronavirus Travel Sentiment Index study and what these findings imply about travel's future. I'll then share a recap of tourism in Pinellas County in 2020, who visited and their economic impact. And then finally, our current forecast for what visitor volume, spending, and overall economic impact may be in 2021. So I'm going to start with what our research tells us about American travel sentiment right now. These are going to be key highlights from our latest Coronavirus Travel Sentiment Index. Regularly for the last 49 weeks since the onset of the COVID crisis, March 15th, we've conducted an online survey of 1,200 Americans and produced this index, which provides measures and understanding on how Americans are thinking, feeling, and approaching their decision-making when it comes to travel during the pandemic. The people we survey traveled in pre-pandemic time and represent each of the 4 major regions of the US. We survey new travelers each week. And after the data is collected, it's weighted by US geography and demographics. The confidence interval in the top line findings I'll be sharing with you today is plus or minus 2.8%. And my update to you today reflects data that we collected just this past weekend between February 12th and 14th. I'd like you to note this is independently produced by us as a third-party research company, not as for and direct support of a specific advertising or marketing agency. It's done with the singular intention of helping Visit St. Pete-Clearwater and the greater travel industry navigate and recover from the COVID-19 crisis. So Americans are seeing some great news on the pandemic front. We talked a bit about it this morning, but they were seeing some good news as they answered our questions this past weekend. Daily new cases down significantly from what let's hope was the final peak last month, and deaths also coming down. There's usually a couple-week lag behind cases, so we should be seeing a dramatic dip in deaths in the United States from COVID soon. And fortunately, these trends are largely across the entire U.S., and our vaccinations have ramped up, with some estimating that it's nearly certain the pandemic will be under control by summer. So the question, what's the current mood among American travelers? The findings from this week's research on American travelers show 5 key things. First, concerns about COVID-related health and safety issues. While they're still elevated, they have greatly improved. Second, most Americans remain optimistic that vaccines are the path back to normalcy. Third, Americans are further warming to travel advertising and growing more marketable for travel. Fourth, it won't be a quick pivot back to normalcy. The pandemic is going to weigh on travel and trip behaviors from some time. And fifth and finally, what I'll be showing you today is that the trends point to Pinellas County continuing to be well positioned in tourism's recovery. So starting with key takeaway number 1, concerns about COVID have improved. When Americans are asked how they expect the severity of the coronavirus situation in the US to change in the next month, 22.7% of American travelers feel the situation in the US is going to get worse. That's down from 27% saying that last week. Meanwhile, 39.3% feel the pandemic is going to get better in the US, and that's up from 37.9% in just 1 week. To see how astonishing this result is in perspective, let's look at it since the start of the pandemic almost a year ago. The orange line is our pessimism line. That's those who feel the coronavirus situation in the US is going to get worse. That's been plummeting over the last 6 weeks and is now at a record low. The blue line is our optimism line. those that think the pandemic is going to get better, and that is at a record high. The highest optimism about the pandemic's course in the US has ever been prior to now was the week of May 4th, when 35.1% thought things were going to get better in the next month. But even then, pessimism still outweighed optimism, unlike today, where optimism is the clear winner. And you're going to see the presence of this feeling as a thread throughout American travelers' other emotions, beliefs, and behaviors. Americans' anxiety about the health impact of the pandemic, that also continues to decline. This week, 66.3% have high degrees of concern about personally contracting COVID. That's down from 69.7% last week. If we look at this over time, you see this has been on a downward trajectory. 73% of us still have high degrees of concern about our friends and family contracting the virus, but that is down from 76.3% last week. And we see this is also heading down, going down quite significantly over the last month. And these better feelings translate to travel. We've been tracking the safety perceptions of over 24 travel and leisure activities. The percent perceiving each of these activities as unsafe is being shown to you on this chart right now. If we take the average of those ratings as unsafe, we see that we are at 46.2%. And again, looking at this over the last 49 weeks, you see perceptions of travel activities as unsafe has been on a downward trajectory since reaching a third peak last month, and now has hit a record low since the start of the pandemic. And there are many other sentiment records at lows or otherwise on positive downward trends. First, 52.7% of Americans say they don't want travelers visiting their home communities still, but this has been steadily decreasing since the start of the year. Looking at agreement with the inability to enjoy travel right now, this week at 55.7%, and this has been coming down. Loss of interest in travel for the time being at 43.5%, that this continues to fall. Belief that travel should be limited to essential needs only, 49.2% have agreement with that. This is also down over the last weeks. And those who would have travel guilt is at 44%. And this is down significantly from a recent peak, December 14th, when that was at 54.6%. And this week, 31.3% feel confident or very confident that they can travel safely. And if we add in those that are somewhat confident, 6 in 10 American travelers feel some confidence about safe travel right now. And although it hasn't yet surpassed the proportion that are lacking in confidence, those firmly confident, as you see here, has been rising over the last month. And finally, looking at Americans' mindset around travel. Are they ready or are they still hesitant? 58.5% say they are in a travel readiness state of mind. In fact, the proportion of Americans in a travel readiness mindset has grown, while inversely, the proportion who are hesitant has shrunk. Which leads me to one of the primary sources of these cheerful feelings, the second major takeaway from this week's study of American travelers. While expectations around vaccines may have regressed somewhat, most American travelers are still optimistic that vaccines are the path back to normalcy and will be instrumental in the recovery of their normal travel patterns. The proportion of Americans who say they will not travel until they're able to get a vaccine is currently at 45%. This is a sentiment that's very receptive to major vaccine news. So we had a peak in that when the vaccines were announced in the fall, and then it's been coming down. So the percent of Americans who say they won't travel until they get a vaccine has been on the decline as the reality of the rollout set in. Similarly, the percent of Americans who say they will not travel until vaccines are made widely available is at 47.6%, and that's down from 53% last week. Meanwhile, the percent who disagree with the notion that they're going to avoid travel until vaccines are made widely available has been increasing. So it's good that disagreement with that is increasing. And we had a notable drop off in one of our vaccine metrics this week, and that's with the percent who say they will or have already taken one of the COVID vaccines. Although this has declined over the last few weeks from the peak it reached January 25th, we had we had a larger jump down this week. But I want you to know we altered the question this past weekend a little bit to include people who've already been vaccinated. So that's probably play a factor in this jump down this week. But more importantly, next week or this coming weekend, we plan to research those that say no to this question to get more specific reasons as to why they're saying no to getting the current vaccines. And as with the percent who said they would get vaccinated, the percent of parents with school-age children that said they'll have their children take one of the currently available vaccines, that did drop down to 43.5% from 52.9%. The declines do not largely appear to be due to safety perceptions. 62.5% of the American traveling population believes the current COVID-19 vaccines are safe. And although that's down slightly from last week, you can see if we look over time, it's been remained relatively consistent since December. So again, we'll be looking more into what's going on there. Maybe that metric will jump back up this coming week. And despite the decrease in saying they're going to take one of the currently available vaccines, 58.6% of Americans credit the current COVID vaccines for their optimism about life returning to normalcy in the next 6 months. Similarly, well over half of travelers say that the current vaccines make them more optimistic about being able to travel safely in the next 6 months. And nearly 3 in 10 say they have started planning travel specifically in anticipation of wide vaccine distribution. And one slight but very important increase we did see this week was the percent of American travelers with friends or family who've already received their COVID vaccine. 54% of American travelers currently have vaccinated friends or relatives. And if we look at those who know someone who got vaccinated by generation and by region, we see the rate greatens with age, as well as residents in the western half of the US. And this is an important metric to keep your eye on for travel's recovery, because if we look at people that know someone who has been vaccinated, it clearly impacts their sentiment. They're more optimistic about their travel future. They are doing more travel dreaming, and they have more trips planned for this year. In terms of their own vaccination, nearly half of Americans who have yet to receive the vaccine expect that they are going to get their vaccine by June. And you can see how this timing plays out in their travel plans. So this chart is showing you the months that Americans have at least tentative trip plans in right now. And you see how relatively modest the next few months are. And then we have our leap in May and July looking like the peak travel month this year. But the subsequent months following July also still holding strong. So again, a lot of Americans think they'll be vaccinated by June. So now the third major takeaway from this week's study: Americans are further warming to travel advertising and growing more marketable for travel. We've calculated a travel marketing potential influence for the index for the last 49 weeks using these 4 important metrics indicating one's openness to and ability to travel. So first, one's a level of concern for personally contracting COVID and their financial anxiety, then their level of openness to travel inspiration, and their level of excitement to travel right now. And the resulting index from that is used to help predict how marketable Americans overall are for travel and from which segments being more or less so. So first, I'm going to show you, this is a normal non-pandemic time. This is how the American traveling public would look in terms of their marketability for travel. We usually have a welcome unevenness on the right side of this curve. Usually Americans are more marketable for travel than not marketable for travel. Today, Americans' travel marketability looks like this. Overall, the index is still skewing heavier to the left, less marketable, but there is important movement downwards on that side and modest but important upwards movement on the right towards marketability. And we use this index to track a number of traveler segments. I know it's impossible to read right now, but I just wanted to show you them all together to see the trend line. We don't have any particular traveler segment hit the highly marketable benchmark yet during the pandemic. But you can see the story of the pandemic in this chart. We reached heights in marketability in June after the first surge, again in the early fall after the second surge, and now we're heading up again, which again is hopefully after the last final surge. And we believe this suggests a much more fertile environment for travel advertising and marketing. In addition to indexing higher for travel marketability, Americans are actively travel dreaming and planning. In the last week alone, more than 60% of Americans have done something related to travel, including daydreaming about a trip, researching travel ideas online, and talking to their friends and family about trips. American travelers have been able to recall seeing travel advertisements at a significantly higher rate as of late compared to earlier months in the pandemic. We peaked last week at nearly 4 in 10 recalling a travel ad. That's down to 1/3 this week, but still well above the fall. And when we asked them how the last travel ad they saw made them feel, 38.9% said that it made them happy or very happy, leaning heavier towards very happy. And their happiness response to travel ads has grown 6 percentage points since back in December. And right now, 39.1% said they'd be happy to see an ad promoting their own community as a place for tourists to come visit. And although this has been on a slight downward trend over the past few weeks, it still significantly exceeds the 29.1% who said they'd be unhappy seeing an ad promoting their own home for tourism. And travel ads, they work. Well over a quarter of all American travelers and over 35% of those millennial age or younger say that an ad has specifically motivated them to travel to a destination in the past. And as we think more about travel advertising, it's important to consider our fourth key takeaway from this research on American travelers. It's not going to be a very quick pivot back to normalcy. So we see that the pandemic is still going to weigh on travel and trip behaviors for some time. We asked a series of questions about Americans' planned travel in the next 3 months. When we ask about the number of regional trips they're going to take, that is those within 250 miles of their home, we can see that the vast majority of Americans' planned leisure trips in the next 3 months are going to remain regional. And while cities and urban destinations show important signs of recovery as aspirational destinations, Americans are still as likely to go to rural areas and beach destinations as cities on their upcoming travel. And that's just something that we never used to see in pre-pandemic times when cities always were largely on top. And while hotels overall they will be the most popular lodging choice, we do still see a high percentage say they're going to stay with friends or relatives, as well as Airbnbs and vacation home rentals remaining common. And it does also not look likely that we'll have a quick return to the freewheeling, high spending days of 2019. Half of American travelers taking trips in the next 3 months say they're going to be more budget conscious when it comes to their travel spending. And when we ask those with trip plans over the next 3 months about the actions they're going to take as a result of the ongoing pandemic, we still see sizable numbers say they're going to seek less crowded places, visit outdoor destinations. There's still some avoidance of air travel and just traveling less overall. Nevertheless, overall, the trends we see point to Pinellas County continuing to be well positioned in tourism's recovery and outperforming national benchmarks. First, when Americans express what's important to them in terms of experiences they want to have on their trips this year, they say things that the St. Pete-Clearwater area either has in abundance and is well known for, or both. Fun, relaxation, outdoor recreation, connecting with nature, food and culinary and cultural experiences. And I want you to keep these elements of high importance to travelers in mind when I show you in a few minutes how your visitors say being in Pinellas County makes them feel. When we ask Americans to tell us in an open-ended format where they most want to visit this year, Florida comes in first. And this isn't just a far-off maybe. When we ask where they daydreamed about visiting just in the last week, we see Florida on the top of this list too. And finally, when we ask Americans about their likely visitation to the St. Petersburg, Clearwater area in the next 3 years, 21.7% of all American travelers say they have aspirations to visit your area. So that includes the larger trends and sentiment. I'm going to recap tourism in Pinellas County in 2020 now, who visited and what was tourism's economic impact. Just a brief overview of the methodology used in this analysis. We designed this research plan and economic model custom to Pinellas County. We started performing our analysis in 2017, with 2018 being our first full year. One primary component is an ongoing in-person visitor survey our team conducts at 17 sites and attractions around the county. In 2020, we surveyed nearly 3,900 tourists to Pinellas County. We also surveyed Pinellas County residents about hosting visiting friends and relatives. We also use a plethora of other secondary data as inputs into our economic model, of course, things like hotel and vacation rental room inventory, occupancy rates, tax receipts. So first, I'm going to start with the economic impact of tourism to Pinellas County in this most unusual year. Our model starts with estimating the number of visitors and visitor days. Pinellas County saw a total of 12.5 million visitors between January and December 2020. The largest segment of the visitor volume were day trip visitors from the surrounding region. That comprised 4.7 million visitors, or 38% of all visitors, and that's up from 26% in 2019. This pandemic caused shift in visitor composition towards day trips from regional residents did play an important role in tourism's ultimate economic impact in 2020. 3.6 billion in direct spending was generated inside the county by visitors between January and December 2020, and just illustrative of the dramatic different impact of hotel guests versus a regional day tripper. Hotel guests who stayed overnight in commercial lodging in the county during their trip were responsible for 1.6 billion in visitor spending during the year, or of that total, 44.5%. So we see how important getting people to come and stay overnight is in the economic impact that they leave behind. And when we look at the distribution of visitor spending, or what we call share of wallet, lodging and restaurants represent the two largest spending categories. And of course, the tourism industry in Pinellas County generates more economic impact than just simply from direct visitor spending. There's indirect impact, such as hotels using a local vendor for dry cleaning services, and induced impact, money that comes into a hotel and then is distributed to its local employees as income that they then spend in the county. Those effects as well. So when we add in induced and indirect effects, the total economic impact of tourism to Pinellas County in 2020 amounted to 5.8 billion. And Pinellas County's tourism industry generated 219 million in tax revenues for governmental entities in 2020. Taxes directly generated by the visitor industry include revenues from the transient occupancy tax, sales taxes, and property taxes paid on lodging facilities. And breaking these economic impact estimates down by quarter and comparing back to 2019 helps us understand the journey that Pinellas County went through last year. Coming out of 2019, one of the strongest years for the global travel industry. The airport chart showed that too, which makes 2020 even more heartbreaking. But the first quarter of 2020, we saw strong visitor traffic and spending in the county, despite that latter half of March being impacted by the onset of COVID. The second quarter was the strongest impacts of the pandemic nationwide. Pinellas County, no exception. We saw hotel occupancy go down 60% from previous years, and then proportional losses and overall visitor volume and spending. But the last 6 months of 2020 were a different story. Americans looking for a place to escape their boredom, the strong pandemic-safe appeal of beach destinations, your easy access, and the opening of your new St. Pete Pier. We saw Pinellas County visitor traffic in terms of volume recover to close to normal levels. However, that traveler makeup changed. We had an increase in regional day trip day trippers and the decrease in overnight visitors. And since hotel guests are the highest spending visitor segment, even though volume recovered rather quickly, overall visitor spending in the county did not rebound at the same speed and was still down over 30% by the end of the year. And comparing the 2020 calendar year overall to 2019, visitor volume was down about 18%, while economic impact was down about 35%. So who is it that visited the St. Pete-Clearwater area in 2020? As I've alluded, there were indeed some changes to the overall visitor picture, but also some great similarities too. I'll run through this quickly. Demographically, the visitor looked relatively the same as 2019 or normal times in terms of age, income, and ethnicities. However, visitors in 2020 were actually likelier to be married rather than single. And as you would expect, given the pandemic and travel restrictions, international composition of visitors was way off. And perhaps most notably, St. Pete-Clearwater visitors in 2020 were much likelier to be in-state travelers, Florida residents. Your top out-of-state markets remained the same, Ohio, Michigan, New York, but there were far more Floridians visiting the area than in years past. So looking at how visitors plan their trips to the area, in 2020, the average visitor to the county made their decision to visit approximately 6.5 weeks or 45.4 days in advance of their actual travel date. This is a 25-day shorter planning window than in 2019. What drives the decision to visit the area, though, remain largely the same: beaches, your beauty, your weather. The resources they used to plan their trip did not shift significantly either. And looking at the details of their trip, 3/4 of visitors arrived to the area by personal vehicle, over a quarter arrived by airline. That's about half of what we saw in 2019. Travel groups look similar to 2019. 2.6 people, we had 1 in 5 visiting with children, most commonly traveling as a couple. And compared to 2019, though, fewer St. Pete-Clearwater visitors stayed overnight. In 2020, we just had 31.8% stay overnight, so lower than in 2019. And that's going to impact the average amount of time that they spent in the area relative to 2019. Visitor spending was at $216.64 per travel party, down slightly from 2019. They continued to participate in a variety of activities during their trip, but most commonly, as you saw from the share of wallet, dining in restaurants, visiting the beach, and going shopping. Visitors in 2020 were far less likely to be first-time Florida or St. Pete-Clearwater area visitors. A total 2.9% were in the state of Florida for the first time, and 1 in 5 were in the St. Pete-Clearwater area for the first time. The average visitor in 2020 said they had made 9.1 previous trips to the area. That's up from an average of 8 in 2019. And of course, critical to your ongoing performance is how satisfied your visitors are left feeling after experiencing your destination. When asked what they liked most about the area, as was in the case in 2019, beaches are cited most. 1/3 say they like everything about the St. Pete-Clearwater area. These are their unaided direct responses to this question. We don't supply them these answer choices. This is just what they say. And when asked the one word or phrase that best describes how they feel when they're in the area, remember what I showed you is important to people and what they have as a travel experience right now. And so relaxed was far and away the top emotion that's evoked by being in Pinellas County, followed by happy. And nearly all visitors report being very satisfied with their experience in the destination. They also reported high likelihood to return. Oops, sorry about that. And very importantly, the average visitor rated their likelihood to recommend the St. Pete-Clearwater area to other travelers as a 9.8 on a 10-point scale. So just really excellent, outstanding visitor satisfaction metrics here. So I'll wrap up with looking ahead. our forecast for the next 8 months. This forecasting model for tourism impact utilizes our primary data from the ongoing visitor profile study and aligns it with current projections for hotel occupancy and performance in Pinellas County from STR, and of course also includes other sources of economic indicators. So hotel occupancy is currently projected to be at or above 2020 levels starting next month in March and reaching 61.7% in July. However, like national trends so far, hotel occupancy in Pinellas County is not projected to reach 2019 or 2018 levels this year. I think the last national forecast said 2023 for hotel occupancy returning to 2019 levels. But you're likely to be ahead of that. A similar pattern is expected for overall visitor volume. This forecast takes into account that as the year progresses and vaccines become more widely distributed, the proportions of regional day trippers, as well as those staying with friends and relatives, those are going to return to historically similar patterns. So right now we project that visitor volume will be at 13.7 million for 2021. Total economic impact generated by tourism to Pinellas County is expected to be above 2020 levels starting in April. Reaching 2019 levels is still likely a year or more away. We see the first 3 months of 2021 are going to be behind 2020, but then we'll exceed 2020 levels for the remainder of the year. And we're projecting tourism impact to be 6.4 billion. Same story for taxes generated for governmental entities in the county. Taxes follow the economics, and we're looking at 236 million. So with that, I thank you for having me virtually with you in the meeting. Again, hope to be with you in person next month. And cheers to recovery.
Yeah, Aaron, you're gonna be able to stay with us, right, for a little bit?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, Tony Satterfield has a question.
Hi, Aaron. Tony Satterfield with the Alden Suites. I always enjoy your presentations. They're very thorough. But you sort of answered one of my questions, and that was we had just had a presentation done by Tampa Airport. And is there a reluctance for people to get on an airplane as opposed to get in a car to take a vacation? I noted that 28% said avoid. Is that number up or down from previous surveys?
So that number is down, fortunately. It's not heading down dramatically. So I think we'll still continue to see avoidance of air travel by some segments of the traveling population, but people will be returning to air travel. And we see, again, vaccines are really a critical factor in that. We see how they're planning their travel. There's just that bump up in the summer when people think they're going to be vaccinated. And I think that we'll see, of course, more return to air travel then. But again, one of my points is I don't want to be overly optimistic about a quick pivot back to normal, because it may take people some time. There is a number of people who are more cautious rather than jumping right back in.
And then just one other quick question. I think this is a rumor, but there was some talk of a ban by I believe it was the federal government, travel into Florida. I think that's just a rumor, but sometimes perception impacts us. Has that slipped into any of your research? Is anybody saying, oh, we're not going to go to Florida because I've heard about this thing?
I have not seen that. And Florida is consistently performing so strongly when we ask people where they want to go. So I have not seen that come up. The only negative thing I'll say, and it's not really that unique to Florida, the other states like my state of California, this comes up too. There's a segment, and luckily it's small, it's like 10%, that let politics affect their travel decisions. Okay. And that's the only negative thing I've really seen in our work about Florida.
Aaron, thank you very much.
Mayor Hibbard.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate the great presentation. Two quick questions. First of all, when you look at the percentage of regions and their citizens who are going to get vaccines, the South was the lowest. I don't know where Florida specifically is, but how important do you believe it's going to be for us to market the percentage of Pinellas County residents that have been vaccinated?
That's a great question, and it's an interesting one too. Amazing. We've interviewed a lot of travelers in the last year because there's just so much you learn by having more in-depth conversation. I would say based on what travelers tell us, the amount of research they do on the area they're considering visiting in terms of pandemic, I would say there's that. If you had that stat noted somewhere on the site that X% of your residents are vaccinated, I think that can only do you good. I mean, it's incredible the amount of pandemic related statistics travelers are looking up before they consider going somewhere. And I think that would make them feel great if they saw, oh my gosh, wow, 80% are vaccinated. I'll be safer.
I'm hopeful about the forecasts you showed. What is the error in those forecasts? Your percent error? The model doesn't create some like a plus or minus on the forecast. I will say it's really highly dependent on what STR, which is another kind of gold standard in the travel industry, what they are projecting for hotel occupancy. They're usually very good in their forecasting, and if they see any downgrades, they'll let us know. But it's only good news right now. So I imagine that we'll be pretty close. Very good. Thank you.
Mayor Bujalski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks again for the report, as everybody has said. It was a lot to follow. First, I'd love us to get a copy of that. And just, Steve, it would be great with something that in-depth to get a copy of it ahead of time, because as you go through it so quickly, I'd like to digest it a little bit before we come. But my question is in the beginning of the report, it talked about the number of visitors, and I believe you said 12 million.
Yes, let me grab the for 2020. Let me grab the visitor number.
While you're looking for that.
Yes, 12.5.
So are we calculating that differently? And the reason I ask is if I remember correctly, in 18 and 19, I think we had like 5.8 and change, and then 5.6 and change. So I'm curious. I might be confusing something, but I'm pretty sure total visitors were.
Numbers include day trippers.
Oh, it includes.
That's correct. So Aaron, if you would mind sharing your screen and the pie chart of the total visitation,
Yeah.
that will help instruct. The 15 million and change is the total pie, including regional day trippers, locals, traveling day trippers. So somebody staying in Orlando that comes over for the day. And then
Right, but they don't live here in Pinellas County.
That's correct. You'll see that she's going to pull it up. That number you're referencing is the actual overnight visitor number. So those who are actually staying overnight in paid accommodations.
Really?
Yep. So here, and so actually, and I apologize, not just paid. The number you're referencing is total overnight. So even those staying with visiting friends and relatives. So there's the breakdown of it there.
So then again, don't go anywhere. So there's another slide where you talk about the percent of cars being used. That's where I was trying to make some reference, because those are the 2 pages in the past reports I always look at. Whether they're utilizing a car when they're here or not. And it looks like that number went down, which is interesting because everybody's talking about people coming here. Most people are coming here by car. Not the number, but the percentage. In the past, it's been a little bit higher, the percentage of people coming here by either getting off the plane and renting a car or coming here by car with their personal car. And it looked like that percentage went down. So I just-
You know, I don't think I just checked that looking at 19. I just checked that last night, and personal car was not down. But when I send this report over to Visit St. Pete-Clearwater for distribution, I can certainly note that in the transportation, the method of arrival and departure, any differences from 2019, we can again add those in for you, so it's easier to have those numbers. And I apologize to all of you for hitting you with so much data. I know it was a lot to follow, but certainly this is available to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and you can always reach out to me with any questions.
Any other questions for Aaron? Okay, thank you so much for checking in with us, and really appreciate the report. And I'm sure that you'll get a few calls with questions, but look forward to receiving that report that you just gave us. So thank you.
Thank you all.